Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be our hands-on demonstration on implementing our own Azure Virtual WAN. For this demonstration, you will be able to follow along within Azure Playgrounds, so I certainly encourage you to do so. In this demonstration, we are going to start off with two separate spoke virtual networks, each of them with a single virtual machine each. This environment will be provided for you with a script, so you can go ahead and run your script to build out the environment in advance, and as usual, that script will be provided in the lesson resources. After our script runs and is up and working, we are then going to start by creating an Azure Virtual WAN. Once our virtual WAN is up, we are then going to create two separate virtual hubs. Afterwards, we are going to connect each of our individual virtual networks to each of our virtual hubs. And then once our VNets are connected to our virtual hubs, we will then test connectivity across multiple hubs in our virtual WAN by remoting into one of our virtual machines over SSH and attempting to ping the internal IP address of the other virtual machine. With that, let's go ahead and jump over to our Azure environment and get started. Okay, we are back up and running in our Azure environment, specifically in the Azure Playgrounds environment. And for this point in the demo, I have already run our build-out script, which has created two virtual networks in our PowerShell environment inside of Cloud Shell. And if we take a really quick look in our resource group, we have two individual virtual networks named Spoke1 VNet and Spoke2 VNet. And we have a single virtual machine in each of those networks called Spoke1 VM and Spoke2 VM, so it's easy to tell them apart. And for this demo, it looks like I am working out of the West US region. You may be in a different region depending on your own playground environment. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first step is to create a virtual WAN, so let's go ahead and do that now. We'll go to our top search field, type in virtual WAN. Click on Virtual WANs here, and go ahead and create a new virtual WAN. In our creation screen, we will supply the usual information such as our resource group. Go ahead and give the resource group location for our virtual WAN. Now keep in mind the virtual WAN does not have to be in the same region as your virtual networks. I could put it in East US if I wanted to, even though our other virtual networks are in West US. But for consistency's sake, I'm going to go ahead and do West US as well. Again, it is certainly not required. Let's give our virtual WAN a name, and since we're sticking with the Control-Alt-Suites theme, I'm going to go ahead and go with Cake WAN. You can call it whatever you want, of course. And for this demonstration, we are going to use the standard SKU as opposed to the basic SKU, so we can enable transitive networking by default. Click on Review and Create. And as far as creating the WAN, that is about it. We'll go ahead and click on Create, and our WAN will be up and working in about 10 to 20 seconds. Okay, our virtual WAN is up and running. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. And in our virtual WAN interface, we have quite a bit of number of options on the left side. We are not going to cover all of them in the context of this demonstration. However, the few I wanted to point out for now is within the connectivity menu on the left side. Specifically, we're going to look at hubs. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the virtual hub is really the main power plant of our virtual WAN setup, and that it acts as a managed hub network to really connect everything else to. So needless to say, it is a pretty important component. Let's go ahead and build out our virtual WAN by now creating two separate virtual hubs. In our hub interface, we'll just click on New Hub, and we're going to go ahead and create two of them. We'll start by filling in our relevant details. We'll go with a West US region. Let's go ahead and give our hub a really creative name of Hub1. And we need to give our hub a private IP address space, which ideally does not conflict with our existing virtual networks. For our existing build-out, I know that the 10.0 and 10.1.00 ranges are available and do not conflict with our built-out VNets, so we'll go ahead and use those. Our first hub is going to be 10.0.0.0/16. Now, we're not going to fill out the other optional information for this specific demo. However, if we wanted to create our different hub network gateways in advance, such as site-to-site VPN, point-to-site VPN, and ExpressRoute, we could choose to do that now. Of course, when doing so, it'll take about 30 minutes for those hubs to get up and working. For this demonstration, we're not going to be working with the different VPN or ExpressRoute gateways, and we also have the option to add those gateways after the hub is created. So for that reason, we're going to go ahead and skip those now and just go straight to Review and Create. And then finally click on Create, and that will start the process of creating your hub. In my experience, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to create each individual hub. While that hub is in the process of provisioning, let's go ahead and create our second one. To do so, we'll go back to our virtual WAN interface, click on Cake WAN again, go to Hubs, and go ahead and click on New Hub to create our second one. Pretty much the same process as the previous one. We need to choose a region. We have our resource group already set, and we will give this hub a super creative name of Hub2. And we will again need to assign the address space like any other virtual network. For this one, we will go with 10.1.0.0/16. Once again, we are not going to create any network gateways for VPN or ExpressRoute, so we can go straight to Review and Create, and then go ahead and create it. Now, as I said a moment ago, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete our hubs, so I'm going to go ahead and pause this video and come back when our hubs are up and working. Okay, and after about a 10-minute pause, our 2 hubs are up and running. Let's move on in our demonstration by connecting our 2 individual virtual networks to each of our hubs here. To connect virtual networks in Azure, from the left side underneath Connectivity, we will click on Virtual Network Connections. And then from our Virtual Connections menu, we can see each of our existing hubs and any current virtual network connections, which are currently set to 0. Let's go ahead and fix that by adding on a new connection, clicking right here. From here, let's go ahead and start by connecting our Spoke 1 network to our Hub 1. To do so, we'll start by giving our connection a name. We will again go very creative by calling it Spoke 1 Hub 1. We need to choose which hub we are connecting to, which will be Hub 1. Choose our subscription and resource group info, and then choose a virtual network in that resource group we're going to connect to Hub 1. In this case, we're going to go with Spoke 1 VNet. Moving on into our routing configuration, we can choose whether we want to propagate to the None route table. In this case, we do not, so we will leave it as No. We will then associate our route table with the default route table in our virtual hub. Choose which route tables we want to propagate to. In this case, we want to propagate to both Hub 1 and Hub 2, since we want to propagate routes across multiple hubs. And optionally, we can choose to propagate to labels, which, as this little info box says, it is a logical grouping of route tables. This is more relevant when you have multiple custom route tables. In this case, we did not, so we'll go ahead and go with our default label as well. Everything else is good. Let's go ahead and click on Create. And then that will go ahead and create our first connection, connecting our Spoke 1 VNet to Hub 1. While that is running, let's go ahead and do the same with VNet 2 to Hub 2. We'll click on Add Connection again in our virtual WAN interface. And then we will do essentially the exact same thing, except this time with VNet 2 and Hub 2. So we'll give it a name of Spoke 2 to Hub 2. Our hub in this case will be Hub 2. Resource group. Choose our Spoke 2 VNet. And then we'll leave our routing information the same as the previous one. We will not propagate to one. We will associate to the default routing table, propagate to both hubs, and then propagate to the default label as well as an optional item, and then click on Create. And then I'll come back here in just a moment once those connections are up and running. Okay, and after waiting a few more minutes, our virtual networks are connected. In the background, this is literally just a network peering connection from the individual VNet to the hub itself. And we can see when we expand our virtual network menus that we are successfully connected to each hub and our connections are successfully provisioned. Now, one thing I want to point out before we move on is that you do not need to separately connect individual hubs to each other. Rather, when you create multiple hubs inside of a virtual WAN, those hubs are automatically connected together as well. There is no separate hub-to-hub connection that I have to create. So at this point, we have our 2 hubs up and running that were automatically connected together. We have also peered to each of our Azure virtual networks with VNet 1 going to Hub 1 and VNet 2 going to Hub 2. Let's now go ahead and test to see if our private transitive networking is working from one virtual network across 2 hubs to another virtual network and see if it works. To test this out, like our previous VPN demo, we're going to go into our Cloud Shell PowerShell environment, from which we are going to connect to one of our virtual machines over SSH and attempt to ping the private IP address of the other one. Let's go ahead and get into Cloud Shell now, and we'll go ahead and get into our PowerShell environment. As our PowerShell environment is provisioning, let's go ahead and get into our virtual machine interface so we can get the IP addresses. And for this example, I'm going to remote into Spoke 1 VM over SSH and attempt to ping the private IP address of Spoke 2 VM. Let's go ahead and start by connecting to Spoke 1 VM over SSH. For this, since we ran our build-out script, which adds the SSH keys to our Cloud Shell environment, I can simply type in SSH in the external IP address, which in this case is 52.190.196.19. And then we'll just hit enter, go through the usual setup of connecting over SSH. And in just a moment, we can see we are connected to Spoke 1 VM at the bottom. Very good. Let's now go ahead and test this full connection out by pinging the internal IP address of Spoke 2. Let's click on Spoke 2 VM to get that IP. And if we scroll down, our private IP address is 10.4.1.4. Let's go ahead and test that out by typing in ping 10.4.1.4. And we can see that we can successfully ping that IP address, which again is going across two virtual hubs and then into that second virtual network. At this point, we've demonstrated the process of creating an Azure Virtual WAN, creating two virtual hubs inside of that virtual WAN, connecting our Spoke virtual networks to each individual virtual hub, and then testing transitive private networking by pinging our virtual machine in our second virtual network from the first virtual network, which is spanning multiple hubs. Very good. That concludes this demonstration. Let's go ahead and review our main takeaways before moving on. Wrapping up our demonstration on implementing a virtual WAN, we demonstrated the process of creating an Azure Virtual WAN, from which we created two individual virtual hubs and then connected each virtual network to our virtual hubs over a network peering connection. Afterwards, we then tested private connectivity, specifically transitive networking, across multiple hubs and across multiple virtual networks as well. That's going to go ahead and wrap this lesson up. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one.